Hello, and welcome to ASMR Ghost Stories. If you enjoy stories about the paranormal, strange but true, all told in either soft spoken or whispered, for that true ASMR experience, then welcome. So before you go ahead and put on your headphones, hit that subscribe button, and then like this video so I know that you're enjoying it and it can be shared to others as well. And click on that notification bell because I do upload twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. And this story was suggested, not the story exactly, but the subject matter of scarecrows was suggested. Thank you for that. And we're going to dive right in. So let's start out with the history of the scarecrow. For thousands of years, scarecrows have helped humans save their crops from crows and other hungry mouths and provided an outlet for human creativity. Scarecrows are as old and as mysterious as human nature and have been useful friends to humans since the mists of early time. Scarecrow genealogy is rooted in a rural lifestyle. The Egyptians used the first scarecrows in recorded history to use to protect wheat fields along the Nile River from flocks of quail. Egyptian farmers installed wooden frames in their fields and covered them with nets. Then they hid in the fields, scared the quail into the nets, and took them home to eat for dinner. Greek farmers in 2500 BC carved wooden scarecrows to look like Priapus, the son of god Dionysus, I don't know how to say it, and the goddess Aphrodite, who supposedly was ugly enough to scare birds away from the vineyards and ensure good harvests. They painted their wooden scarecrows purple and put a club in one hand to scare away the birds and a sickle in the other for a good harvest. The Romans copied the Greek scarecrow custom, and when Roman armies marched through Europe, they introduced Priapus scarecrows to the people there. Almost simultaneously with the Greeks and Romans, Japanese farmers made scarecrows to protect their rice fields. They made scarecrows called kakashis, and forgive me for my pronunciations. So they named them kakashis, shaped like people. They dressed the kakashis in a raincoat and a round straw hat, and often added bows and arrows to make them look more threatening. Kohiki, the oldest surviving Japanese book compiled in the year 712, and I really apologize for messing up the name. So it's the oldest surviving Japanese book, and it features a scarecrow known as Kobiko, who appears as a deity who can't walk yet, knows everything about the world. In Germany, scarecrows were wooden and shaped to look like witches, with which scarecrows were supposed to hasten the coming of spring. In medieval Britain, young boys and girls were used as live scarecrows or bird scarers. They would patrol the fields of crops and scare away birds by waving their arms or throwing stones. In later times, farmers stuffed sacks of straw traces of gourds and leaned the straw man against poles to scare away birds. In the United States, immigrant German farmers made human-looking scarecrows called Butzemann, which later changed to Boogeyman. They were dressed in old clothes with a large red handkerchief around their necks. Native American tribes across North America used scarecrows or bird scarers, mostly adult men. In Georgia, Creek Indian families moved into huts to their cornfields to protect their crops during the growing season. In the Southwest, Zuni children had contests to see who could make the scariest scarecrow. Pilgrim families took turns guarding their fields against birds and animals, but as Americans expanded west, they invented new kinds of non-human scarecrows like wooden and straw figures. During the Great Depression, scarecrows could be found all across America. But in the agribusiness era, after World War II, farmers sprayed or dusted their crops with chemicals like DDT until scientists discovered their harmful effects. To substitute for chemicals, some farmers built scarecrows like whirligigs that revolved like windmills to scare away the birds. Modern scarecrows still guard fields around the world during the growing season. Today, some farmers use technological scarecrows instead of straw and wooden figures. Technological scarecrows like reflective film ribbons tied to plants to create shimmers from the sun, or automatic noise guns that are powered by propane gas. Other farmers in India and some Arab countries station old men in chairs to throw stones at birds to keep them away from the crops, just like the medieval bird scarers. Even though Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz admonishes her dog Toto, "Don't be silly, Toto. Scarecrows don't talk." The scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz does talk. In his first appearance in the book, he reveals that he doesn't have a brain and wants more than anything else to acquire one. The reality is that he already has a brain, but since he is only 2 days old, it is largely unused. As the story unfolds, he demonstrates that he does use his brain, and it keeps growing along with his experiences. The scarecrow is symbolic because even though he has the title the wisest man in all of Oz, he is wise enough to know his limitations. He continues to credit the wizard for his brains, and he hands over the throne of Oz that the wizard bequeaths him to Princess Ozma. He becomes one of her trusted advisors, but carves out enough time for himself to play games and enjoy life. Paul Cornell focuses on the sinister aspect of scarecrow evolution in his 1995 Doctor Who novel, Human Nature, when he has his villains, the Family of Blood, create an army of scarecrows to try to capture the Time Lord. Tim Preston, in his children's book, The Lonely Scarecrow, sees a winter future for the scarecrow. He imagines that instead of dying in the fall, after the festivals and fun of Halloween are over, the scarecrow is covered with snow in the winter and becomes a useful friend until he resumes his guard duties in the spring. Scarecrows have evolved along with people, and people sponsor scarecrow festivals every year in places as diverse as West Kilbride, Scotland, St. Charles, Illinois, and Alberta, Canada. After the Scarecrow festivals are over, both scarecrows and people enjoy a long, friendly, restful winter before they resume their more strenuous duties in the spring. So now that we have a little bit of history, let's dive into Harold from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The story and origins behind the killer tale. Harold. I made a documentary about scary stories to tell in the dark. The 3 books consisted of over 80 stories of folklore and urban legends. It was impossible to appropriately address each and every story in a single documentary. This website, in part, is a chance to look at individual stories that I researched, tales in which I learned about their origins and social context. It's a chance to examine stories that I ultimately found to be fascinating in some way or another. And this is Harold. Now, just a little side note. This is from a website of scarystudies.com. So you can pull this up, and there is a video to watch of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, this documentary. So let's continue. Most scary folk tales are passed down verbally for many years, if not centuries, before a folklorist or writer of some kind records it for posterity. Many folk tales never become well known or popular. They are recorded as a verbal tale amongst hundreds of others, written down and forever part of countless collections that are chronicled at a university somewhere. When Alvin Schwartz included the story Harold in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark's 3rd book, it just so happens that he gave new life to a relatively unknown story that may have never seen much attention otherwise. Now, Harold is regarded as one of the greatest boogeymen for generations of kids who grew up fondly remembering the story. So what is the story? And what is the story behind the story? The story of Harold from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The story was not widely known before 1991, at least not as much as many other tales included in the books. Although many people reminisce about the illustrations from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, Harold is an example of a story that packed quite a punch. For some generations, any scary scarecrow has become synonymous with good old Harold. Here is the full version of the scary story Harold, which was in the 3rd of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones. When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually, they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but it was boring. All day, the 2 men tended their cows. At night, they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything. Let's make a doll the size of a man, he said. It would be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden to scare the birds. It should look like Harold, Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made a doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave it Harold's name. Each morning, on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night, they brought him inside so he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they were both sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like that stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it or else." And then the two men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Alfred asked. "He's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," Thomas said, "and that will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave them behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him." So they left Harold sitting in the corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making those sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We have been up here on this mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them. But the stools would cost a lot to replace. There's really nothing to be afraid of, they told one another. After all, what could a doll do? They drew straws to see which one would go back. It was Thomas. I'll catch up with you, he said. And Alfred walked toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. The origins of Harold. The main source for Alvin Schwartz's version of the Harold story comes from an Austrian-Swiss tale included among many stories and examinations of them in Max Luthe's Once Upon a Time on the Nature of Fairy Tales, 1976. And you're going to have to forgive me for botching the words. The version is titled The Tunch Baptized by the Cowards of Goschenen. And as you can probably tell from the title, there are many differences between Alvin Schwartz's Harold and this tale. I explored Firestone Library at Princeton, where Schwartz researched much of his stories. And you can read the actual page that Schwartz would have read and adapted into Harold. And I also record the text of the story and break down some amazing differences and similarities between the versions. And you can look at that up on the website. It is said that ancient chronicles report how many years ago, the mountain pasture began right behind the house of Goldschenen. At that time, the hamlet of Abfrut did not yet exist. In this pasture lived wanton servants who led a dissolute life, did not say their prayers, and scoffed at sacred things and God's commandments. Once they took some odds and ends and made a ditalogue, or as it's also called, a tunch, tungle. They played all sorts of foolish pranks with it, smeared it with cream and pudding, and finally went so far as to baptize it. Now it came to life and began to talk. After they recovered from their first shock, they resumed their mischief, behaved more and more dissolutely. After some time had passed, the toggle began to climb up on the roof of the hut at night, where it trotted about like a horse. In the autumn, when the men came down from the mountain pasture, they forgot the milking stool, but when they noticed it, nobody wanted to go back to go get it, for they were afraid. So they basked lots, and the task fell to the worst one of them. He returned while the others continued with the cattle. When they got to the top of the hill where Abfrut stands today, they looked back and saw a ghost stretching out their comrade's skin on the roof of the hut. Since that time, a dreadful ghost lived there, and the pasture could no longer be used. So essentially, that is the story of Harold, which was adapted from an Austrian-Swiss story. So I do hope you enjoy, and if you have any scary stories of scarecrows or any movies, comment below. Share them with the world. We all enjoy it to be just a little bit scared. So until the next story, hit that subscribe button and the like button if you enjoyed this, and also the notification bell because I do upload twice a week. And until then, stay just a